Well, another very warm welcome back, all my vintage dirt bike loving YouTubers, and thanks to you all once more for tuning in to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, just before we get on with the next video, I'd just like to clear up a few points with regards to some of the comments that viewers have been making with some of the bikes that I've been posting and why they can't hear the bike start up after each and every video that I post. Well, there are a few reasons for that. Now, the first reason is many of these bikes that I film, especially the bikes that are filmed in the paddock, are usually done very early in the morning, and many of the clubs and organisations do have a curfew that no bikes will be started until a certain time of day. So that's one reason. Now, the other reason is that many of the bikes that I do film, especially the paddock bikes, the owners 9 times out of 10 are never in the vicinity to get them to start the bikes up in any case. And the third and most important reason is that at the end of the day, I can't make a rider or an owner start a bike up if they don't want to start the bike up. I've always endeavoured to try and get the owners to start the bikes up so my YouTubers can have a listen to the bikes running, but if an owner decides he doesn't want to start the bike, then there's absolutely nothing that I can do about it. So I hope that kind of clears up that little problem there. Okay, we're going to press on now with our next video posting. Oh, and by the way, sorry, but there's no startup in this video. Now, this featured bike of Gary Fleming's is of course not a full-blown HL500 Yamaha, but is Gary's own interpretation of one of these iconic HL Yamaha Fourstrokers. Now, as you know, original HL500s, or Aberg Yamahas as they were sometimes known, were the brainchild of Swedish motocross stars Torsten Hallman and Sten Lundin, who at the time were actually working for Yamaha in Sweden. Now, both Torsten and Hallman thought it might be a very good idea to try and make a motocross racer that was based around the Yamaha XT500 engine. Now, when they approached Yamaha, they initially refused to give them a bike to try out their brand new project, so Hallman and Lundin then went ahead anyhow, and they bought a second-hand XT500, which they then set about retuning the engine for more power, and then renamed their brand new bike the HL500 Yamaha, or Hallman and Lundin 500. Now, the original HL Yamaha chassis was actually a modified Husqvarna frame, which Hallman and Lundin modified to take this taller and heavier 500 Yamaha motor. Now, I'm not sure if Gary's machine actually shares any parts of the original HLs, but this big lump of an XT500 motor is certainly a very good start. Now, it's said that the stock XT500s put out about 30 horsepower, although once Hallman and Lundin worked their magic with their modifications and tuning, they added another 20 horsepower to the motor to crank out around 50 or so ponies. Although even in their stock form, these 4-banger Yamaha motors were still pretty bulletproof machines. Okay, they were never going to make you the whole shot king straight off the starting line, but if you wanted decent power and reliability, then these XT500 power plants were still a very good choice for a club racer's bike. But this big single-cylinder 2-valve 4-stroke motor was still a very good engine despite its bulk and size, and as I remember, I think it had a bore of 87mm and a stroke of around 84mm. Now, it also had a 5-speed gearbox, and it was fitted with a quite large heavy duty multi-plate clutch, and again, I'm sure these had a dry sump with the motor's engine oil being housed in the frame, because as you know, the original XT and TT 500s were essentially designed as road or trail bikes. Now, of course, original HL500s would have been fitted with forks and the front brakes from the Yamaha HL500 two-strokers, although Gary's bike here appears to have a set of Yamaha forks of some description on his machine, and of course he still has the original twin leading shoe brakes. But if you're looking for a decent suspension clearance on the rear of your particular motocrossers, then they don't come any bigger than the massive travel seen here on this bike. A very good pair of period correct Fox air shocks, which of course were fitted to many of the original HL Yamahas back in the 1970s, although later versions would then be fitted with much more better Swedish made Öhlins piggyback shocks. Now, this alloy swing arm that's fitted to Gary's bike is another bit of a mystery, and I've absolutely no idea of its origins, although almost all of these HL Yamahas were certainly fitted with these types of light alloy box section swing arms, so who knows, this could still even be an original part, but without actually speaking to the bike's owner, I can't verify that statement, unfortunately. Now, the rear brake is undoubtedly a Yamaha original part, and once again these Yamaha drum brakes were pretty good stoppers for a 1970s design. But back in the day, very few original HL500s were actually made. I think they had an initial run of about 200 bikes in 1978 that had the XT500 motors and the Yamaha YZ spec suspension. I think they followed it up with another run of about 200 bikes in 1979, which owners still say was the better bike in 1979 because it had the modified drop swing arm, which gave much more suspension travel, and of course it also had several more motor upgrades to increase the power. So with only around 400 of the original factory bikes actually made, it's not really surprising that you never see many of them around the racetracks these days, and I think the ones that you do actually see are more than likely Yamaha HL kit bikes made from profab frames and either TT or XT 500 motors. Now, don't get me wrong here, many of these kit form bikes can look very similar to the original factory machines, and to the untrained eye it's not really that easy to distinguish one from the other, although because of their rarity, this is the main reason that bikes like this of Gary's are put together, because even if you could locate an original factory HL back in the late 1970s, the chances are that you'd have to sell your house to buy it. But for me personally, I think it's still good that we can at least have a small glimpse into what these four-stroke Yamahas were like back in the day, and although Gary's bike's maybe not a fully paid up member of the Yamaha HL500 family, it's still a very nice looking Twinshock racer, and Hallman and Lundin certainly got their sums just right when they paired up that big Japanese four-stroke motor with one of their own homegrown Husqvarna frames to end up producing an iconic and entirely new concept motocross racer. But nevertheless, this example of Gary's is still a decent interpretation of one of these Hallman Lundin Yamahas. Now, okay, it may not have all the correct parts on it that you'd be looking for on an original HL bike, but who cares? Because as I said, with only a very limited number of original factory bikes ever made, it's still for me quite a treat just to even look at a replica of one of these extremely rare machines. Well, I hope you enjoyed that quite brief look around Gary Fleming's HL500 Yamaha Fourstroker. Not, of course, a thoroughbred HL500 by Hallman in London, but nevertheless, still quite a nice old Twinshock racer. Okay, coming up in my next posting, we're going classic racing once again, and we're going to show you a few races from the 2008 Blencarn Classic Scramble. So that will be coming up on my YouTube channel next, and maybe after that we'll go back to showcasing some brand new paddock bikes. So that's all coming up soon here on my channel. Okay, until the next time, everybody, continue to be safe and well, and we'll all get together here once more to speak about old vintage racers right here on Classic Dirt Bike TV.